Well, the quarterback battle for Utah this spring is the one that is not only the most interesting, but the most likely to potentially decide who wins the Pac 12 this year. And we recently got some insight into that.
Our Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you. Wherever you listen to or watch this show, we're inching ever closer to 2,500 on YouTube. I want to get to 3,000 by the time the season starts. And by the time the season starts, we may not know who's going to be playing quarterback for the two-time defending champions. That's quarterback, not quarterback. I don't know where that came from. But we may not know who will be behind center for the Utes, the two-time reigning Pac-12 champs. So let's bring on JT Wistrcill, host of the Locked On Utes podcast. JT, it is great to have you on as always. And what a fun time to really dive into spring football.
It really is. It was great to be out there for the game, see everything play out. The biggest question was the quarterbacks. That's what we got by far our best look at. The Utah defense had been the main, kind of like, hey, this group is obviously farther along than the offense because the offense is, of course, missing the guy who's helped lead them to two back-to-back Pac-12 championships. So the defenses look really strong. A lot of the defensive guys, veteran starters last year, Kyle Whittingham just gave him the game off. So we got to see the quarterbacks, a guy like Brandon Rose, who it was his first time getting major game action inside Rice-Eccles Stadium. And it was really fun to see what he was able to do. Bryson made some plays. Nate threw an interception, but still did some special things with his legs. And he had a few other guys step up too. So it was really fun being out there for the game. And as you mentioned, just that reminder that we're inching closer to the start of football season.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the quarterback talks, players that that stood out, and all that sort of stuff. But I want to start with kind of the big picture takeaways here, JT. Not everyone played for Kyle Whittingham, as you mentioned. So, what is kind of the reaction to this year's spring game up in Salt Lake City?
I think there's a lot of different noise and stuff that comes out. Spring games can be challenging too, right? But I will say the surprising thing was the quarterbacks actually did get hit. Like Brandon Rose was running down the sideline and tried to run over a defender. So that was something that was fun to see. Nate Johnson got pushed to the ground. Bryson Barnes got sacked. So it was live. So that was exciting and fun to see. But as you mentioned, always a little interesting just because the other one defense isn't out there. But I think like I said, we'll talk about the quarterbacks in a second as it pertains to the 2023 for sure guaranteed success for Utah football team. Because Brandon Rose, we still don't know if Cam Rising is going to be available for the first game. So even though Brandon Rose looked good and looks like the best quarterback at the moment, we still don't know how he's going to factor into things. He might not play. One guy who's for sure going to play and looked explosive and is going to have a chance to put together a special season is Jaquindon Jackson, the former Utah quarterback who transferred in. He originally committed to Texas, then went to Utah. And look, now he's a running back after being Bryson Barnes being out for the backup job. He said, I want to play. I'll go play running back. Made that transition literally against Southern Utah. Spencer, you were on the call for that game. He came in late as a quarterback. He had a run just like late in that game where it's like, man, that's just like, he ran it for like over 15 yards. It was just like, man, that guy's just special with the ball.
I think it was an outside stretch to the left, running to my right. I was on the radio call for Southern Utah with Chris Holmes, and I remember watching that run too and thinking, wow, that's your number 3 running back. Like it was at the time, Tavion Thomas, Micah Bernard, and Jaquindon Jackson. I saw him get that carry when the game was well within hand. And boy, that was, it popped then. And he has certainly popped since then as well.
Well, and to your point, he was still a quarterback when he was in. He was the third quarterback at that time. So he was still a quarterback. That's where it's like, he should be running ball. Makes the transition to running back, got his first 2 carries against Arizona State, and then later in the season against USC or Colorado and USC really exploded and just looks like he's taken the next step. Literally, like we talked about, mid-season position transformation. Yes, he was always a little bit of a running quarterback. It's still totally different going over, learning the schemes, everything, the vision, running between the tackles more, all that stuff. And he looked so good in the spring game. And I think the thing I was most encouraged about is there was a critical 3rd down last season where he was in at running back in the backfield and he dropped a pass. This spring game, he had 2 catches for 52 yards. He was unbelievable out of the backfield, making guys miss, breaking tackles, flying all over the field, just defenders struggling to even get a hand on him. He looked explosive. He had 3 carries for 17 yards, so over 5 yards a carry to Jaquindon Jackson. And yes, Mekhi Bernard was back. He was out there too, did a couple things too. And Mekhi Bernard will factor into this backfield. This should be the Jaquindon Jackson show in 2023. He looks so explosive. He looks special. Such a dynamic playmaker. Now that he can, like I said, be a receiver out of the backfield too, a viable pass catching option. I think it'd be fun to see him involved in the screen game. I'm really excited for Jaquindon Jackson because I always felt like, hey, he's going to continue to take the next step. I didn't know what it would look like for him as a receiving back, considering he's never been much of a pass catcher. As we said, he's used to throwing the ball, not running it and not catching it himself. It looks like that's come along well. And I'm really excited for him. I think he's going to have a chance to put on a special season for this Utah football team.
Yeah, and you need playmakers there, right? Tavion Thomas no longer with the team, and the running game so integral to what Utah does offensively. I think that's just got to be a position where you have a guy who you look at and go, yeah, it's an all-conference caliber player, or he's explosive, he's dynamic, he can be someone who can really carry the load, because the quarterback position has been the biggest talking point for Utah all spring, understandably so, because Cam Rising might be ready for week 1. He might not be ready for week 1, which puts a lot of attention, a lot of the spotlight for this Utah football program as they go for their 3rd straight conference championship on the quarterback situation. Now, there are 3 guys who we've talked about that have been battling it out for that potential starting job. We will reiterate that from now until the end of time. Well, not the end of time, but until the end of the offseason, that we don't know. But it kind of feels right now, JT. Let's dive into the quarterbacks here, because you've got Brandon Rose, you've got Bryson Barnes, and I just forgot the name of the 3rd guy who's in there.
Nate Johnson.
Yeah, Nate Johnson as well. Big picture coming away from the spring game. We'll get to kind of each guy's individual performance, but after the spring game, who do you feel is the leader in the clubhouse?
I do believe it's Brandon Rose now, which is crazy considering
It is crazy.
It's crazy. It's what Kyle Whittingham said, though, too. And I still think, yes, Bryson Barnes still has a chance to get in this. Someone was actually, I was communicating with someone in my YouTube comments this week who was like, well, if Barnes is, they don't like trust Barnes, like, why wouldn't they give him more spring game reps? And it's like, well, the entire goal coming into spring football, that Kyle Whittingham literally said was, we know what Bryson Barnes is. We want to give Brandon Rose and we want to give Nate Johnson a chance to go at it. So they still felt like, because of where Bryson is, I think that they wanted to give him some reps. He got 2 series and looked good. He scored the first one, a 3 and out. The second one, but some of that was on, they ran the ball once, nice pass breakup over the middle of the field. I thought that was more of a good play by the linebacker, Ethan Calvert, for Utah, than it was a bad throw. Then just a sack. I mean, the offensive line got beat that play. And Bryson was working with the 2s. That's the other thing, like, to show you where this is at. Brandon Rose throwing to Money Parks, has some of the starting offensive linemen out there for him, handing off and just checking it down to Jaquindon Jackson. Those are the guys that Brandon Rose was working with. Bryson Barnes was working with Tyquan Gilmore and Chris Reed, both of which just entered the transfer portal. So it was clear based on how it was kind of working out, like, hey, that they want the Brandon Rose is the guy who's working with the 1s. They have said he is the top guy. And like I said, I still think Bryson could get in this. I mean, I'm very curious to see when August 31st rolls around. Are you going to put in a quarterback who has never played a college game before, a live college game, reps, any of those things? Nate Johnson was the one last season who got a couple of Nate Johnson, Bryson Barnes. Those were the guys late in games you were putting in to kind of run your offense and do different things. Brandon Rose never got a single one of those, but it seems like time and time again, and it's from what we've seen as well, Brandon Rose has looked like the best quarterback in this Utah room, just a little bit more than Bryson Barnes. And I think the thing they like with Brandon is I think he handles pressure a little bit better. That was Bryson's big problem against Penn State in the Rose Bowl. That was why the only reason Utah was in the first half is because Cam was able to escape that pressure and make a play, and even getting lucky on things where he just like threw the ball to Devon Vele and then the DB collides into him because it's such an underthrown pass, like just kind of crazy stuff like that. Brandon can't escape and buy time and make that happen. Brandon is a little bit better at that right now. I thought he was really impressive with accuracy overall. He'll miss a throw. I mean, he's by no means going to, we've talked about on numerous times, Spencer, how loaded this conference is in quarterback. Brandon Rose is not going to walk it, start against Florida week 1 and instantly going to be like, whoa, is this a top 5 quarterback in the Pac-12? No, he's going to make mistakes. It's going to happen, but He's also going to be able to make some plays. I thought one thing he did a really good job of was just taking what the defense gave him. It was a lot of soft coverage throughout the day. So there's a reason Jaquindon Jackson had 2 catches for 52 yards, right? It was very soft coverage. He would be able to get 5 of those before he was even touched. And then he's able to do the special things and make guys miss. But just recognizing, hey, I got a special player like Jaquindon Jackson who's got this much space. I want to get him the ball. I thought Brandon Rose did a really good job of that. I thought he did a good job going through his reads, showed pretty good accuracy overall. He had one near turnover throw. It was one of those ones where it was nearly intercepted. One bad miss to me, but outside of that, I like the accuracy. I like the decision making. I didn't think he took sacks. He did a good job late game situation or end of the half situation. He threw a pass away instead of trying to buy time and force something, which allowed Utah to be able to send Cole Becker out, the former Colorado kicker. Hey, Utah actually might have a kicker this year, by the way. He made a 46-yarder. That was something like Kyle Whittingham would have never even taken a 46-yarder last year unless he absolutely had to. So it's an exciting thing for the Utes. But yeah, Brandon Rose looked like the best guy. They limited Bryson Barnes' opportunity. He only got to throw 3 passes overall. And then he actually did have he ran in a 33-yard touchdown. It's the second year in a row in the spring game where he's ran in touchdowns. So Bryson Barnes can still do some good things, but I feel like this coaching staff, Andy Ludwig and Kyle Whittingham included, are really excited with the dynamic ability that Brandon Rose can bring to this offense.
Yeah, there's still one more question to be answered for the quarterbacks going forward with Cam Rising working his way back from the injury. And one other question that I have for all of you is, why haven't you bought Built Bars yet? Maybe you have, and you can thank me now, or you can thank me later, or you can just thank Built, because they make the best tasting protein bars ever. They're healthy, they taste amazing, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Pure, delicious, wonderful, glorious chocolate. You can get your next order of Built Bars at Walmart or Sam's Club. You can also get your specialty flavors still at built.com. They've got a bunch of great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie. I'm a mint brownie kind of guy. They've got everything that you could possibly want. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro puff. Both are unbelievably good, by the way. And as I said earlier, go do it. If you have already, you can thank me later. All right, back to the football here, JT. If you had to, you said Brandon Rose is the leader right now, but there's still a little bit more spring practice. There's still fall camp. There's still a lot of time between now and game 1 against Florida at Rice-Eccles Stadium. If let's assume, and Kyle Whittingham is very mum's the word. He's not giving any of that sort of stuff away. If Brandon Rose is the leader right now, what would one of the other guys have to do, Nate Johnson or Bryson Barnes, to surpass him and be the starter when Cam Rising isn't there? Which, again, going back to what I began the show with, could play into the Pac-12 championship conversation if Cam Rising has to miss more time, or if Cam Rising re-aggravates that injury over the course of the season, which unfortunately has happened with guys before. This is going to be a really important position for the Utes.
There's one area where I do feel like Bryson Barnes does a better job than Brandon Rose still, and that's I don't think he turns the ball over. I think he doesn't really put the ball in danger. I think he plays it extremely safe, which yesterday Kyle Whittingham was talking about like his principles for what he likes for Utah football. He just talked about physicality, running the ball, defend the run. One of the things obviously on there as well would be don't turn the ball over, because that is a defensive-minded head coach's worst nightmare and thing he hates more than anything is giving his defense a short field to have to defend. So I do feel like if Brandon Rose, especially as we're rolling to fall camp, is making more of those turnover-worthy throws, if maybe he just gets a little more reckless, something like that happens, I believe that would allow Bryson Barnes to be able to close the gap and be able to be the guy that starts week 1, because they're going to be like, hey, we want a guy who takes care of the football. The 2 biggest things Coach Ludwig has talked about is they want a guy who shows repetitive accuracy. So not just one accurate throw, then an overthrow, like basically what Anthony Richardson does and going to be a top 15 pick for, but basically continued accuracy and then not turning the ball over. So I think that's where Bryson Barnes got a chance. He's a guy you trust. He's shown up in these games before. He's helped you get wins. That Florida program is a little bit of a mess right now. Their quarterback situation in the spring game was really bad. Apparently, Billy Napier opened his press conference by actually saying like, "Oh, we got a lot of work to do. We need to find the quarterbacks." That was not the case with this Utah football team. You came away from that scrimmage feeling good about the future and where this team is at. So this Utah team hasn't lost a home game since 2018. Even if Cam can't go, I would be surprised if this Florida team, just with the disarray it's kind of going on there, it sounds like, is able to knock them off. But I mean, they're going to have to be sharp at the quarterback spot, and the coaches are going to put the best guy out there. I think there's a lot of fans who are like, I know what Bryson is. I want to see Brandon Rose. myself and the coaches obviously are going to put out there the player who gives them the best chance to win the game. They do not care about the future. The future is what spring football was for. And the reason that I still say Brandon Rose has the lead is because Coach Whittingham has says Brandon's the guy right now. Bryson is nipping at his heels. If we didn't have that quote to go on, I probably would think Bryson Barnes is still the leader in the clubhouse. But as I mentioned, I think they like what Brandon Rose can do, and especially that and just how he handles pressure better. I think he does a better job of that. But I do want to mention Nate Johnson. Really interesting guy in this race because coming in, it was supposed to be between him and Brandon Rose. Brandon Rose was a little better early on. Nate got hurt. And that was a little bit of a bummer. Is you at Cam Rising, excuse me. Actually, he was talking to Pac-12 media on the spring game. They had him on the interview, and he said none of the quarterbacks started the spring portion great. They all improved overall. Nate didn't get a chance to do that because he was hurt. So he came in. Yeah, he threw an interception. It was just one of those ones where inexperienced. He looked, his first two reads were on the left. So he turned to the right and just kind of predetermined he was going to throw it because he did see that his receiver separated for the corner. The only problem is there's also a safety who was over top over there who then came in and picked off the pass. But Nate last year had 3 rushing touchdowns. He makes so many explosive plays with his legs. He is such a dynamic and electric runner of the football. His very first carry he took for 15 yards. I mean, he is a guy I think that's still going to be involved. And I do think if he could just tighten up that accuracy a little bit, there's a chance he could get back into this. Based on what we saw, he did have a few overthrows, just a few missed opportunities. It feels like he's the distant third guy right now. Overall, he was 4 for 7 with a touchdown and an interception, but he did, like I said, still threw a touchdown, still led a successful drive for this team. But I am curious and kind of interested to see how the coaches feel about him because we only saw, once again, we saw 7 throws of him. The coaches have been watching all of practice. So I do feel like right now it's definitely Brandon Rose, Bryson Barnes, Nate Johnson. Any of those guys still has a chance. Bryson Barnes obviously has the best chance to upset Brandon Rose if Cam Rising isn't ready to go. But if the game was tomorrow, I really believe Brandon Rose would be leading Utah out there.
Let's move off the quarterbacks and go big picture here with the Utes. They've been such a great defensive team and a good running team as well over the last several years with Kyle Whittingham en route to their back-to-back Pac-12 championships. Is there an area that stood out to you in the spring game where you looked at and said, boy, that kind of seems like it might be a weakness. That might be an area where we need to improve, might need to address that in the portal, or so-and-so is going to have to step up. Was there anything that like that stood out?
So not in the spring game as much, but I will say this. We are allowed to go to practices and we are allowed to watch 20 minutes of practices. And because we didn't really see the one defensive line in the spring game, and there were a couple players out for the one Utah offensive line, the Utah offensive line did really good against the Utah defensive line in this game. But once again, it wasn't really one-on-one, like their best on best, basically. It was kind of the 2s and 3s going against some of the starting offensive linemen with a backup or 2 thrown in there. The offensive line got beat a lot by this Utah D line. And I do think this Utah defensive line will be much improved when you look at some of the things that those guys were able to do overall, like Junior Tafuna, Samote Peppa made some special plays too. So I feel like those guys coming on strong late in the season is an indication this will be one of the better defensive lines in the Pac-12. But at the same time, you lose Braden Daniels, who's going to get drafted in a couple days here in the NFL draft. You have to shuffle some guys around. You're going to have a first-time starter at left tackle. I'm still a little concerned on the offensive line. You do have a couple starters back there, and you got a guy in Cam who is very good at evading pressure once he's ready to go. But the offensive line is a place of concern. I don't know if you'll find a player that's necessarily good enough entering the portal that's going to walk in and start so soon. So that's where it's going to be tough for them. I mentioned those transfer receivers. I feel like Utah has a good 5 receivers right now. Maybe if there was a certain level of player, the coaches have talked about maybe adding receivers. So maybe they'll kick the tires on that. Maybe they want to bring in another tight end too. Brant Keithy's apparently coming along well in his rehab though. So I don't see that being the case. And yeah, defensively, I feel good. I mean, even we'll talk about some of the guys who kind of stepped up and broke out, but there was a few guys in this game defensively that I thought showed some nice prop. I should mention safety is the one they lost their backup safety, Clayton Isabel. And even though Elijah Davis has shown a couple things, I think they got at least one more safety to that room, especially with Nate Ritchie coming off his mission. We didn't really see him on the field a lot. He's still trying to get back up to playing speed. So I think safety and offensive line would be the 2 that maybe but even safety, like I said, they got 2 guys I feel really good about. It's just like if one of those guys gets hurt, then I'm kind of like, uh-oh. So, but offensive line is the one where I trust Jim Harding. He's a really good offensive line coach. I just want to see, especially against a physical defensive line like Florida. I mean, they have a 400-pound nose tackle. So we're going to find out pretty quickly how Utah is able to
400.
He's 400 pounds. He was a freshman last season. He was huge.
That might clog up some space in the middle of your defense here. But JT, let's close Utah spring game talk with this question. Can you give me 3 guys who you feel like earned playing time based on their spring game performance that you might have had on your radar previously, but really popped or maybe came out of nowhere a bit?
I'm going to say the first guy, I felt like he was kind of the 4th or 5th receiver coming into the spring game, but it's Mikey Matthews. He's a true freshman receiver for this Utah team. He's an early enrollee. He had 7 catches for 59 yards. Almost all of them were on one drive with Brandon Rose to start the second half when they put him in. I think he's got a good rapport with Brandon Rose. This is a guy that Kyle Whittingham said is not Britton Covey, but some of the things he does reminds him of a young Britton Covey. And for Kyle Whittingham, earning a praise like that does not come easy. So it shows you how highly he thinks of this guy. So
that's
I think
high praise.
yes. So I think Mikey Matthews is a guy right away that can come in, contribute in the slot. There's a chance. He's a pretty explosive returner, not the biggest guy. So I don't know if they'll want to put him back there right away, but I think he's a guy who's going to be out on the field on some 3rd and longs or different situations. Look, the 1 and 2 receiver spots are pretty locked down. Devon Vele, Money Parks. Those are going to be the 2 guys. Devon didn't play. Money Parks led this team in receiving yards in spring game. He had 5 for 71. Should have been 6 for 80. Brandon Rose just overthrew him one time. But I really like Mikey Matthews. I think he flashes explosiveness, and I think he's a guy who's going to contribute right away for this Utah football team. So I'll go with him first. The second guy I'm going to go with is Justin Medlock. This may be a little bit of a cheat because, look, during the spring game itself, he was still good. I believe his numbers still ended up overall with 11 tackles in the game, but he's a guy just in the spring practices you could just see was always around. And look, this Utah linebacker room, a little bit of a struggle last year. Lander Barton in year 2. I expect by the time this Utah football season is over, Lander Barton will be the best player on this Utah defense. Karene Reed playing next to him. He's been a veteran guy for a few years that provides something. And Leavani Demooney's a Stanford transfer who's coming over. So I don't know how much Medlock will be able to play, but I just think so often he looked like the best guy on the field defensively. He was always around the football, flying through, shooting gaps, filling holes. He brings good physicality. The coaches really liked him as a recruit. He was a redshirt freshman last year. I think he's got to see the field. And the last guy I'll go with is, once again, another little bit of a cheat, but Miles Battle. He's an Ole Miss transfer coming in. He took a pick 6 to the house, picking off a young Utah quarterback in Mac Howard. But you just see the size, the length there, his ability to stick with guys. He gave up 1 touchdown, but it was such a play where it was like, if this wasn't a spring game, I feel like he would have been all over to break it up. It kind of felt like he was taking the play off a little bit. And once again, I'm not like saying like, oh, his effort's bad. It's a spring game. I really didn't think it was. I think it's literally only that. But Miles is a guy that I think is going to provide some nice length on the outside. He is not Clark Phillips, but I think he's going to be able to come in and help out this defense overall. So overall, I thought the spring game was definitely a win for this Utah team. You got some confidence seeing the young guys step up. Good to see a couple of the veterans, like the offensive line. As I said, it had been a struggle for a lot of spring for them, just in terms of coming together and giving up some sacks. I thought it was great to see them still go out there and show some continuity, even though it was a little bit of a different group, and push some guys around. Even if I'm still going to be concerned because it's not the best Utah defensive lineman they were pushing around, they were still able to get push, which is something. So overall, I thought the spring game was a win, or the 22 Forever game, as it has been dubbed, was a win for the Utah football team.
Well, as you can tell, if you're a Utah fan out there and you want daily Utes content, JT Wistrcill is the guy to go to Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. He's the host of Locked On Utes. JT, great stuff today. Thanks so much, man.
Oh, it's great joining you, Spencer.
Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time and have a wonderful rest of your day.